My daughter and son-in-law forced me to sign the papers to sell the house the moment my wife had just passed away. "Sign it, Dad. You're old now. Go live in a nursing home. We'll take care of this house." Watching them rudely hammer the for sale sign into Eleanor's beloved garden, I did not resist. I simply picked up the pen and quietly signed my name. They celebrated their victory, convinced that I was old and senile, easy to push out onto the street. But those two greedy people had no idea that my nod that day was exactly what marked the beginning of their nightmare. Stay a little longer to see what happened. And don't forget to tell me which city you're listening to this story from. My name is Arthur Sterling. I spent my entire life looking at the world through numbers, technical drawings, and measurements precise down to the millimeter. As an architect, I know exactly the difference between a durable structure and a pile of rubble. It lies in the load-bearing strength of its pillars. I can look at a blueprint and tell you precisely where it will crack when a storm arrives. But at the age of 75, standing in this mint green kitchen, I realized I had failed miserably at the most important calculation of my life, measuring the human heart. You see, this kitchen is not merely a place for cooking. It was painted this gentle mint green because it was Evelyn's favorite color, my late wife. She always said this shade made the house feel like an eternal spring morning. We lived here for 41 years. I remember installing those oak shelves with my own hands in the summer of 1985, when my daughter Lydia had just turned 4. People often say a house is an asset. To me, it is a living entity. It carries Evelyn's breath in the lingering scent of cinnamon and star anise. It carries the bright laughter of little Lydia hidden within the grain of the wood. But today that living presence is trembling. Not because the foundation has weakened, but because the people standing inside it are looking at it like a fat piece of prey. The doorbell rang. Not the gentle ring of a guest, but rapid, demanding presses. Lydia walked in, dragging Julian behind her, the husband she had married only 2 years ago. Julian was the model image of a real estate agent. Slicked back hair shining with product, a suit too tight for an ego far too large, and eyes that constantly prowled like a hunter, appraising his prey. They did not hug me. They did not ask, "Dad, do your knees still ache when the weather turns cold?" Instead, Lydia walked straight to the large mirror by the entrance, adjusted a strand of her hair, and sighed with exaggerated exhaustion. "Dad, I told you already, this house is far too gloomy. Look at it, thick curtains, outdated paint. This space is really not good for the health of an elderly person." Meanwhile, Julian began a performance I could only describe as an autopsy. He wandered around the living room, dragging the tip of his polished leather shoe across the oak floor I had always been proud of. He stopped at a small scratch, the mark left by Lydia's tricycle 30 years ago, then clicked his tongue. "This floor has termites, right, Dad? Heavy depreciation. You know, in my line of work, scratches like this can knock tens of thousands of dollars off the value of a house. Such a waste, letting a golden property like this deteriorate." I stood silently, my hands clasped behind my back. It was a habit of mine when observing a structure showing signs of subsidence. I looked at my daughter. Lydia used to be a sensitive little girl, the kind who sobbed when she saw me accidentally break a rose branch in the garden. Now the woman standing before me was looking at the house she grew up in as a pile of money slowly rusting away. Julian continued, his voice echoing hollowly. "Dad, I have a few partners. They're very interested in this land. If we tear it down and rebuild in a modern style, or even better, a complex of studio apartments—" "Julian," I interrupted, my voice calm in the same way it had been when I used to direct construction sites. "Are you measuring my floor with the tip of your shoe, or measuring my patience?" Lydia immediately stepped forward and grabbed my hand. Her touch was cold, carrying none of the warmth of family affection, only the urgency of a plan already decided. "Dad, Julian only wants what's best for you. You're old now. Climbing stairs every day is a risk. Have you heard of the Silver Pines nursing home? It's luxurious, like a five-star hotel. You'll have a private nurse, friends your age to play chess with. And most importantly, you two will get a massive amount of money from selling this place to solve Julian's crypto investment debts, right? I thought to myself, but I said nothing. I had spent the past 2 weeks finding out why my daughter had suddenly become so filially devoted. Julian was drowning in debt, and this house was his final lifeline. I looked out the window where the white rose bushes Evelyn had planted were still bravely blooming under the late afternoon sun. Suddenly, I remembered my little grandson, Leo, the only person in this family who still ran over to hug my legs whenever he came to visit. I gently called Leo over and patted his head as he curiously watched Julian holding a tape measure. "Leo," I said, loud enough for Lydia and Julian to hear, "do you know why this house has stood strong for 40 years? No matter how many storms passed, no matter how the ground trembled?" The boy shook his head, his round eyes wide. "Dad, Julian says it's because of good cement and bricks?" the child repeated innocently. I smiled, a bitter smile. "No, my boy, cement will crack. Bricks will break. A house truly stands strong because of the memories built within its walls. Every laugh, every tear, and the sincerity of the people who live inside, that is the strongest mortar of all. If you remove sincerity, this house becomes nothing but an empty shell, ready to collapse at any moment." Lydia turned her face away, avoiding my gaze. And Julian? He only gave a faint smirk, snapping the tape measure shut with a sharp click. "Your philosophy is great, Dad, but philosophy doesn't pay medical bills or maintenance." At that moment, I understood that my lesson had fallen into empty air for them. Betrayal had already begun to creep into my home like black mold, silently eating away at the foundation of family. The next morning, the house sank into a frightening silence, the kind of silence that usually appears right before a storm makes landfall. Julian did not leave right after yesterday's afternoon tea. He told me that work in the city was temporarily stable and that he wanted to spend time taking care of his frail old father. A proposal that sounded devoted on the surface, but for someone who had spent his entire life calculating margins of error like me, I could sense a dissonance in his tone. I woke up before the sunlight had even slipped through the gaps in the curtains. The habits of a structural engineer never allow oversleeping. I got out of bed, slipped my feet into my worn house slippers, and headed toward the wooden staircase, the backbone of this house. The staircase was made of red oak, the kind of wood Eleanor chose because she said it made a warm sound every time someone stepped on it. I knew every creak of each step by heart. The third step from the top always creaked a little louder because it bore the most weight. The seventh step had a slightly dull tone. It was my personal piece of music. But this morning, that music was clouded by a strange smell. A sharp, bland scent of industrial chemicals slipped between the smell of aging wood and the familiar cinnamon fragrance of the house. I placed my foot on the first step. Still normal. The second step, nothing unusual. By the fourth step, just as I shifted my weight forward, a chilling sensation of slipperiness ran along the sole of my foot. My entire body, already weakened by 70 years of age, suddenly lost its point of support. Instinctively, I grabbed for the railing, but my old hand slid across the wood as if it had just been coated in grease. I fell. The sound of bones striking the hard wood was dry and painful. I tumbled down 3 steps, a sharp burst of pain shooting from my hip, straight into my head, blurring my vision. In that moment, I saw a figure rush out from the corner of the hallway downstairs. "Dad! Oh my God, are you okay?" Julian's voice rang out, urgent and alarmed. He rushed over, but instead of carefully helping me up, he turned my body over, his hands pressing firmly on my shoulders, as if he were inspecting a piece of merchandise that had just been dropped and damaged. "See, Dad? I told you. Your health no longer allows you to live alone in this fortress of memories anymore," Julian shouted, but his eyes were not looking at the bruise on my elbow. They were looking at the phone in his other hand, his thumb moving quickly across the screen. Lydia appeared right after, still in her silk pajamas, already holding a stack of pale yellow documents. Good thing we didn't leave, Julian. If we had, the old man could have been lying here until he died, and no one would even know. That's horrifying. I lay there, my back against the wall, my breathing uneven. The physical pain was very real, but the coldness in my heart was even more real. While Julian and Lydia busily tossed around arguments about how dangerous the house was, I began observing the scene with the eyes of an engineer. I did not look at my son. I looked down at the fourth step. Under the pale morning light streaming from the attic window, I saw a strange, glossy streak covering the wooden surface. It was not water, and it was not ordinary floor polish. It was silicone oil, the same oil I used to lubricate machine gears in the woodworking shed behind the house. A streak applied with extreme precision, enough to make an elderly man lose his footing, but subtle enough not to leave an obvious stain for outsiders to notice. I glanced at my hand. My palm was coated with a thin, slippery film. Inside my mind, a technical drawing appeared. The angle of the staircase was 35 degrees. With my body weight and the nearly zero friction coefficient of that oil layer, the fall had been calculated to cause an injury just severe enough, not enough to kill, but enough to prove that I was no longer capable of caring for myself. This was not an accident. This was an assassination of trust, staged by my own blood. Dad, listen to me. Julian knelt beside me, his voice now artificially gentle. I've already contacted Golden Sunset. It's the best nursing home in the state. Nurses available 24/7, someone to feed you, even a chess club for old men like you. I'll sell this house to cover the costs so you can stay there comfortably. Lydia held the documents out in front of me. Just one signature, Dad. We're doing all of this for your safety. I looked at the name Golden Sunset printed on the cover of the file. The name sounded painfully ironic. They wanted to lock me inside a luxurious glass cage so they could freely tear apart the corpse of this house. They wanted to convert 40 years of my memories into numbers in their bank account. Julian had spreading oil on the floor, but in truth he was spreading oil on his own conscience so that betrayal could glide more smoothly. I remained silent. My silence made Julian restless. He thought I was in shock, in pain from the fall. But no, I was measuring. I was measuring the depth of greed in his eyes. I was measuring how much truth Lydia's coldness could freeze. Dad, say something, Julian urged. I slowly raised my hand, not to take the pen from Lydia, but to wipe the oil from my palm onto my sweater. I looked straight into Julian's eyes, the eyes of a man who had stood firm on thousands of towering structures against raging storms. Help me inside, I said, my voice hoarse but firm. I need to sit in my chair. Julian and Lydia exchanged a glance, a flash of triumph appearing in their eyes. They helped me into the living room and placed me in the old leather armchair, the chair opposite the empty seat where Eleanor used to sit across from me every evening. I sat there, feeling the pain radiating from my hip, but my mind was clearer than ever. Numbers began running through my head. The value of this house, the debt Julian was carrying. I knew he was losing money in a suburban real estate project, and the insurance money Eleanor had left behind. They thought I was an old object ready to be liquidated. They had forgotten that the best engineer is not the one who builds new things, but the one who knows how to reinforce what is about to collapse. I will sign, I said quietly, my eyes still fixed on my wife's empty chair. Lydia was about to shout with joy, but I raised my hand to stop her. But not today. You said this is a big decision, right? Then give me 3 days. 3 days to say goodbye to this house in the way of a surveyor. Julian hesitated, but then he nodded. Fine, Dad. 3 days. But don't change your mind, because I've already paid the deposit at Golden Sunset. When they stepped outside to continue discussing how they would divide the money from selling the house. I looked down at the wooden floor. The oil stain was still there, glimmering like a reminder of cruelty. I smiled faintly, a bitter smile. Julian, you used oil to make me fall, but you forgot one basic principle of physics. Oil is also the thing that catches fire the fastest. Dinner was served on the long oak table that, for 40 years, had witnessed thousands of clinking bowls and chopsticks. From the difficult days when there was only a plate of boiled vegetables, to the celebratory meals when Julian passed his university entrance exam. But tonight, the air was thick with a strange flavor, the smell of artificial concern wrapped in the shell of care. Lydia had personally gone into the kitchen. She cooked pan-seared steak, the dish she believed was luxurious and suitable for an elderly person who needs protein. But the meat was too rare, red juice bleeding across the stark white porcelain plate, looking more like an open wound than a delicious meal. Julian sat across from me, constantly tapping his fingers on the table, a habit he had since childhood, whenever he was hiding extreme anxiety or a plan not yet fully formed. In the middle of the meal, Lydia gently placed her knife down, the metal striking the porcelain with a sharp sound. She pulled a glossy brochure from her designer handbag, printed with images of smiling elderly people beneath the artificial sunlight of a carefully manicured garden. "Look at this, Dad." Lydia pushed the brochure toward me, her bright red fingernails pressing firmly on the glittering line of text. "Golden Sunset, where old age becomes a vacation." I researched it very carefully. This place isn't a hospital, and it isn't an ordinary nursing home either. It's truly a 5-star resort. She began speaking endlessly, her voice sweet as honey mixed with poison. "You'll have a private nurse checking your blood pressure every morning, a chef preparing meals according to strict nutritional plans. There's even a heated swimming pool and a ballroom. You won't have to struggle with this slippery staircase anymore, and you won't have to worry about cleaning this house that's far too large and gloomy." Julian continued, his voice lowering with an air of sympathy. "Dad, we're really worried about you. The fall this morning was a warning from God. You've devoted your entire life to buildings. Now it's time to let someone take care of you. At Golden Sunset, you'll meet people of your own class, retired intellectuals. You'll be much happier there than here." I looked at the artificial smiles in the brochure. Those smiles looked as if they had been pasted on with cheap glue. In the world of an engineer, I know that a structure that looks beautiful on the outside is not necessarily safe on the inside. "A vacation," I repeated, my voice hoarse. "It sounds more like an eviction sentence wrapped in sugar." Lydia froze for a moment. The smile on her lips twisted slightly, but she quickly regained her composure. "What are you saying, Dad? We're using the last of our money to take care of you." I set my fork down and looked straight into my daughter-in-law's eyes, then turned to my son. The pain in my hip still pulsed faintly, reminding me of the silicone oil on the forced stair. "Julian," I called his name. He flinched, the fork in his hand falling onto the plate with a clatter. "You and Lydia calculated everything carefully, didn't you? Moving me out, selling this house, all of it is for me?" "Of course, Dad," Julian insisted firmly. "Do you think we're greedy?" "We just want you to be safe." "Then let me help you with the professional calculations," I said calmly. "How much do you plan to sell this house for?" The question dropped onto the dinner table like a slow-ticking bomb. Lydia froze. Her eyes widened, her breath caught in her throat. She did not answer immediately. She glanced quickly at Julian as if asking for help. 1 second passed. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. 2 seconds passed. The silence stretched long enough for me to hear Julian's heartbeat accelerating. "Dad, what a strange question," Lydia finally spoke, her voice rising a note higher, the clear signal of a lie. "We haven't thought about that. We're only worried about your health first." $5 million, Julian suddenly interrupted his wife. He looked at me, his eyes red from lack of sleep and pressure. This location, combined with the land size, is worth about $5 million on the current market, Dad. That amount is enough for you to live at Golden Sunset for the rest of your life and help me resolve a few small problems at my company. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long breath. The truth had finally surfaced, naked and painful like the rare steak bleeding on the plate. $5 million for 40 years of memories. $5 million for your mother's mint green paint. $5 million to throw this burden, your father, into a luxurious glass box, I said, each word striking like a hammer driving a nail. You can't be so selfish. Lydia lost her patience and slammed her hand on the table. This house is dying. You're getting old. Julian is in trouble, and this is the best solution for everyone. Sitting here hugging a pile of memories isn't going to solve the bank debt. I stood up, even though the pain from the fall still tormented me. I no longer looked at the colorful brochure. 3 days, I repeated the promise I made that morning. I said I would give you my answer after 3 days. But remember this, in architecture, a house can be valued with money, but a family cannot. You have valued me, valued this house. Then do not blame me if I choose to reevaluate your existence in my life. I quietly turned my back and walked slowly toward the dark bedroom, leaving behind 2 people standing frozen in the middle of an unfinished dinner. That night, I did not sleep. I sat at my desk and pulled out the old blueprints of the house. I did not look at the foundation or the beams. I reviewed the plumbing and electrical systems. There are things inside this house that only the person who built it knows how to operate. If Julian wants a dead house, I will show him a house that knows how to defend itself against invaders who call themselves children. On the morning of the second day, I woke up with a completely different appearance. No longer the frail old man aching from the fall or sinking into gloom because of betrayal. I chose a neatly pressed shirt, tying the necktie Eleanor had given me on our 30th wedding anniversary. I walked downstairs with a gentle smile on my lips, the smile of a man who had accepted his fate, or at least wanted Julian and Lydia to believe that. "You're up early, Dad?" Julian looked up from the dining table, still holding a financial newspaper, his eyes revealing surprise mixed with suspicion. "I've thought it through," I said calmly, pouring myself a cup of black coffee, no sugar, bitter as ash. 3 days is too long. You were right. This house is too large for an old man. I'll start packing today. Anything I can't bring to Golden Sunset, I'll sell off or throw away. Lydia nearly spilled her expensive honey tea as she exclaimed in delight. "Oh, Dad, that's the wisest decision you've ever made. I'll call the moving service right away. Do you need help sorting your things?" "No need," I waved my hand. "Let me do it myself. It's the proper way for me to say goodbye to the past. You two just focus on your own matters." All day long, I played the role of a voluntary prisoner. I dragged old cardboard boxes up from the basement and began placing worn technical books and brass measuring tools into them. But behind the half-closed door of my study, I was not packing at all. I was carrying out my final reinforcement calculations. I began by altering the electrical configuration in the main panel. For a man who had spent a lifetime working with electrical and plumbing systems, making a few lights flicker according to a strange pattern, or producing faint whistling sounds inside the water pipes whenever someone passed a certain spot, was effortless. I wanted this house to come alive again in the most terrifying way for those who were preparing to declare it dead. I placed old family photographs, the ones Julian and Lydia had deliberately ignored, into hidden corners where they would inevitably see them when passing by. Subtle reminders of guilt, planted like psychological landmines. Near late afternoon, I heard Lydia's car engine leaving the driveway. Only Julian remained. He thought I was taking a nap in my room, but in truth I was standing in the dark hallway behind the reading room, where an old ventilation shaft had never been sealed. It functioned like a giant stethoscope, transmitting sound from the living room straight to my ears with remarkable clarity. The sound of a phone dialing echoed upward. Then Julian's voice, low but trembling with excitement. "Hello? Yes, it's me. Everything is going according to plan. The old man has softened up. He's packing his things." A brief silence followed, as if the person on the other end asked something. Julian chuckled dryly, a sound that made my skin crawl. "A power of attorney? Don't worry. Once he signs the Golden Sunset admission form, I've already slipped a property authorization document underneath it. The old man's eyesight is poor, and he'll be emotional about leaving the house. He won't examine it closely. As soon as he's inside that place, we'll sign the contract transferring the entire property to the construction corporation building the shopping mall. Yes, demolish everything. My debts will disappear, and I'll get a commission large enough for Lydia and me to settle overseas." He paused, his voice sharpening with cruelty. "The mall needs a clean site next month. Prepare the excavators. By the time the old man realizes the house has turned into a pile of rubble, he'll already be locked inside that 5-star resort. No one listens to the cries of a senile old man." I stood in the darkness, gripping the wooden chair so tightly my knuckles whitened. My heart tightened, not with fear, but with absolute disgust. The son I once carried in my arms, the child I had taught how to measure the straightness of a line, was now calculating how to flatten his mother's memories in exchange for a piece of paper erasing his debts. "A shopping mall," I whispered. A lifeless block of concrete crushing Eleanor's soul. The pain in my hip suddenly disappeared, replaced by a current running along my spine. Julian had made a mistake. He believed I was an old man with failing eyesight. He had forgotten that someone who spent an entire lifetime supervising construction sites could see the deepest cracks beneath the most polished paint. I quietly returned to my study. I stopped packing entirely. I opened the hidden drawer beneath the tea table and took out a small recorder, a device I often use to capture technical readings on site. I placed it inside the ventilation shaft. Julian wanted a sweet transaction. I would give him a public sentence. That evening, I walked down to the dining room wearing an expression of complete calm, even a hint of dullness. I handed Julian a scrap of paper on which I had scribbled a list of the items I wished to keep. "Julian," I said, pretending my voice trembled slightly, "I'm a little worried. At the new place, will they allow me to bring my measuring tools? They're my keepsakes." Julian patted my shoulder, his palm warm with artificial kindness. "Of course, Dad. You can bring whatever you want. Just sign the admission paperwork the morning after tomorrow, and I'll handle everything." I nodded slowly, my eyes drifting blankly into space. "Yes, the morning after tomorrow. I'll sign. But tonight, I want you both to stay here. One last night with the whole family in this house. Is that all right?" Julian glanced at his watch, hesitated briefly, then nodded with quiet satisfaction. "All right, Dad. Consider it a farewell party for the old house." He did not know that tonight would become the longest night of his life. This house does not only contain mint green walls and gentle memories. It also holds hidden corners I carefully reinforced throughout the entire day. When darkness falls, strange sounds, ghosts of the past, and even Julian's own confessions will begin echoing through the speaker system I secretly connected. On Tuesday morning, the sky hung heavy and gray like poured lead, and fine drops of rain began tapping against the office window. Julian and Lydia had left early to complete the procedures at Golden Sunset, though in truth they were preparing the stack of authorization papers they believed I would sign that afternoon. Their absence created the perfect opening for the guest I had been waiting for. The doorbell rang 3 short, decisive chimes. I opened the door. Standing there was Marcus, a gaunt man with snow-white hair and piercing eyes behind round-frame glasses. Marcus was not only my family's longtime lawyer, he was also the man who had drained a bottle of whiskey with me on the night Eleanor passed away. "You look worse than the last time I saw you, Arthur," Marcus said as he stepped inside, gripping his worn leather briefcase tightly. "But your eyes, they're exactly the same as when we inspected that hydroelectric construction site together 40 years ago. The eyes of someone preparing to tear something down in order to build it again from the ground up." "I'm not tearing anything down, Marcus." I led him into the mint green kitchen where I had already prepared 2 cups of hot coffee. "I'm reinforcing it. Only this time, the material isn't concrete. It's legal." We sat down at the oak table. I pushed toward Marcus the technical file of the house, a hand-drawn blueprint detailed to every joint, every underground pipe, and every specialized material that formed the structure. "Julian wants to sell this place to a shopping mall corporation," I said, my voice calm to a chilling degree. "He thinks the value of this house lies in the land area. He wants to level everything to erase $5 million of debt." Marcus flipped through each page of the drawings, his lips pressed tight. "That's an insult to architecture, Arthur. This house is one of the few remaining structures built with classic red oak mortise and tenon joinery, combined with the natural ventilation system you designed with your own hands. It's a work of art, not a pile of rubble." "Exactly." I looked straight into Marcus's eyes. "That's why I don't want to make an ordinary will. A will can be contested, dragged into lawsuits questioning the legal capacity of a 70-year-old man who wrote it. I want something more permanent, something that can lock their greed in place." Marcus adjusted his glasses, a subtle smile appearing. "You're thinking of a heritage conservation trust?" "Exactly," I nodded. "I want to register this house on the Urban Architectural Preservation List. With the unique technical details I documented, combined with your certification of its historical value, we can absolutely have the state authorities stamp this land as protected heritage." Marcus began drafting the documents. The sound of his fountain pen moving across paper blended with the rain outside, creating a rapid, relentless rhythm. This legal trap was extraordinarily sophisticated. Once the house entered the preservation list, it would become a massive boulder, blocking every speculation plan. By law, whoever owned this land would not be allowed to demolish it, not allowed to alter the facade structure, not even allowed to repaint it in a different color without the approval of the Architectural Council. "Do you know what this means, Arthur?" Marcus paused, looking at me with concern. "If this land is worth $5 million for a shopping mall project, then once it becomes protected heritage, its value to speculators will drop by at least 80%. No corporation would be foolish enough to buy land where they cannot even drive a nail into the wall as they wish. Its value would remain only at ordinary residential use, around $1 million at most." I smiled and took a sip of the bitter coffee. "That's exactly my purpose. I want to shatter Julian's $5 million dream. I want him to hold that authorization paper in his hand and present it to that construction corporation, only for them to look at him like a clown holding a worthless sheet of paper. The value of the land will collapse, and that shopping mall will vanish like a wisp of smoke." I did not need money. I had more than enough for the rest of my days. What I needed was to protect the warmth Eleanor left behind within these walls. If Julian viewed his father as a number, I would show him how cruel numbers could become when they turned against him. "There's one more clause," I added, pointing to the beneficiary conditions section. "This trust will be managed by an independent third party. Julian and Lydia may live here, but they have no right to sell it, no right to mortgage it. They will have to live inside a museum they despise, maintaining it every year with their own money. That is the sentence I give them." Marcus looked at me, a faint shiver passing through him. "You truly are a ruthless engineer, Arthur. You're building a golden cage with no exit for them." "No, Marcus," I shook my head. "I'm simply giving them exactly what they want. They want to send me to a nursing home for professional care. Then I'll let them stay here and take care of this heritage professionally. That is fairness. Just then, I heard the screech of Julian's car braking along the gravel driveway. They had returned. "Sign it, Marcus," I urged. I put my pen to the trust agreement. Each stroke of my signature was decisive, like a chisel cutting into stone. When the red seal of the law office pressed onto the paper, I felt a new surge of strength fill my chest. 40 years of measurement, and at last I had created a structure no force of money could penetrate. Julian stepped into the house, his face bright, holding a wilted bouquet of roses hastily bought at a gas station. "Dad!" "Great news. All the procedures at Golden Sunset are finished. You just need to sign these last papers, and we'll celebrate with a big dinner." Lydia entered as well, a triumphant expression on her face. Her eyes gleamed as she glanced around the room, as if taking inventory of the property. She did not even notice Marcus sitting in the shadows of the living room. I looked at Marcus. The old lawyer nodded and calmly placed the file back into his briefcase. The real game was only beginning now. Julian believed he held the key to a treasure, but he had no idea that I had just turned that treasure into a tomb that would imprison his own greed. The house suddenly became radiant in an unusual way. During the final 7 days before the retirement stay at Golden Sunset, Julian and Lydia transformed into first-rate performers on the stage of filial devotion. If someone happened to pass by, they would see a model family, a son attentively helping his father on a walk, a capable daughter-in-law personally working in the kitchen, and an aging old man smiling with quiet satisfaction in the embrace of his children. But for me, a man who had spent a lifetime inspecting the tremors within structures, I could sense the deep cracks hidden beneath this polished layer of putty. On the morning of the first day of the final week, Julian brought home an expensive massage chair, the kind upholstered in premium cowhide and filled with dozens of electronic rollers. "Dad, your back after that fall needs special care," Julian said, sweat beading on his forehead as he struggled to assemble it in the middle of the living room. "I ordered the best model. You just sit here, press a button, and all the pain will disappear. I don't want you carrying any pain when you step into your new place." I looked at the chair, a lifeless mechanical mass, large and out of place among Eleanor's classical wooden furniture. It resembled a sacrificial offering Julian presented to atone for the streak of silicone oil on the stairs. I sat down and let the rollers pound against my aging flesh. It hurt, a dry mechanical pain, yet Julian watched me with eyes gleaming in satisfaction. He was not looking at his father. He was looking at the signature he hoped to receive at the end of the week. Lydia was no less determined. She put away her luxurious silk outfits and replaced them with a floral apron, spending hours in the kitchen. The smell of garlic butter, chicken soup, and fresh pastries drifted through every corner of the house. "Dad, try this soup." Lydia carried a small porcelain bowl directly to me, her voice sweet like carefully simmered broth. "I woke up at 5 this morning to stew the bones. You need to build your strength so you can move houses." I took the silver spoon and raised it to my mouth. The sweetness of the soup was genuine, but its aftertaste turned bitter in my throat. I remembered the years before when I lay sick in bed and Lydia would not even stop by because she feared the smell of illness might cling to her handbag. Now she willingly allowed kitchen smoke to settle into her carefully styled hair. This sudden kindness was not a rose. It was fertilizer for the trap they were setting. On the 4th day, the house filled with gifts. Boxes of premium tea, soft fleece clothing for the elderly, even the newest tablet so that Dad can video call us every day. I accepted everything. I savored this falsehood with a bitter amusement, as if watching a play whose tragic ending I already knew. There was a strange satisfaction in seeing traitors labor so intensely to perform the role of good people. Each time Julian massaged my shoulders, I wondered, how did those hands hold that bottle of silicone oil? Each time Lydia talked cheerfully about the future at Golden Sunset, I calculated quietly. Had she already contacted the demolition company? One afternoon, when sunlight filtered through the branches of the old oak trees, I called Leo over. The boy was curiously playing with the new tablet his father had bought for me. "Leo," I whispered, my voice low enough for Julian standing in the hallway to faintly hear. "Have you ever seen a praying mantis?" The boy shook his head. The female mantis often appears very gentle with her mate right before she eats him. In the human world, it's the same, my boy. A house that looks the most solid is sometimes the one about to collapse because of termites inside. And remember your grandfather's words. When someone suddenly becomes excessively kind to you, don't celebrate too quickly. Check whether they are hiding a knife behind their back or an authorization paper under the table. Leo blinked at me, not fully understanding, but Julian behind him suddenly froze. I saw his shadow on the floor tremble slightly. He stepped inside with an awkward smile. Dad's teaching the boy those dry philosophies again. Come on, Leo, let Grandpa rest. By the sixth day, their impatience had reached its peak. The filial devotion performance began showing cracks as Julian kept receiving anonymous phone calls, and Lydia started snapping irritably about the musty smell of the house she had endured for an entire week. The final dinner in this house was served on the seventh night. Julian placed a bottle of aged red wine on the table. He poured me a full glass, then glanced at the watch on his wrist. "Tomorrow is Sunday, Dad. The Golden Sunset car will arrive at 9 in the morning. I think tonight is the right time for us to finish the administrative paperwork. That way tomorrow you can just pick up your suitcase and go." Lydia pulled a thick stack of documents from her handbag. On top was the admission form stamped with a bright red seal. Beneath those papers, I saw the edge of another document where a small printed line read, "Comprehensive Real Estate Authorization Agreement." They looked at me, their eyes burning with hunger clumsily disguised as concern. The mask they had worn for 7 days had grown so fragile that a gentle breeze could make it fall away. Julian held out the fountain pen, his eyes marked with the bloodthirst of a predator about to seize its prey. "Dad, sign here. That way tomorrow, everything will be easy." I took the pen. The cold metal touched my skin. I looked at the authorization paper they had cleverly embedded within the stack. If this had been a week earlier, perhaps my hand would have trembled. Now I felt strangely calm. I remembered Marcus's smile when he handed me the countermeasure documents. "Just sign it, Arthur. Let them believe they've won. When this legal trap activates, that very signature will become the rope tightening around their greed." I lowered the pen. The name Arthur appeared in clear, decisive strokes. Lydia held her breath. When the final dot of the signature appeared, she exhaled heavily, as if a 1,000-pound burden had just been lifted from her shoulders. Julian quickly snatched the paper, blew lightly on the ink to dry it, then carefully slipped it into his briefcase. "It's done, Dad. Get some rest. Tomorrow morning I'll take you to Golden Sunset early. It's wonderful there. You'll love it." I watched them clear the table with undisguised excitement. They believed they had finally rid themselves of the senile old man and secured the $5 million. They did not know that the conservation trust I had signed with Marcus the day before had already nullified every property transfer right in that authorization paper. I accepted going to the nursing home, not because I had been defeated, but because I wanted to stand at a distance and watch their sandcastle collapse. When the construction corporation refused to buy the land because it had become protected heritage, Julian would realize he had not only lost the money, but had also gained a mountain of debt and a house he could never demolish. "Good night, my children," I said quietly. That night I lay in the mint green room for the last time. I was not sad. I was waiting for the sound of those illusory numbers they had built upon betrayal finally shattering. On Sunday morning, the sky no longer scattered the fine drizzle of the previous day. Instead, a vast gray stretch hung flat and heavy, like an enormous burial shroud draped over the old neighborhood. The air was thick with the scent of damp soil and rotting oak leaves, the smell I had breathed in for 40 years. Now it seemed stronger than ever, as if the house itself were trying to cling to my lungs, unwilling to let me go. The private ambulance from the nursing home Golden Sunset pulled up in front of the gate at exactly 9 in the morning. The stark white paint of the vehicle clashed sharply with the quiet, mint green color of the wooden walls. 2 medical staff members in crisp uniforms stepped out, their movements swift, professional, and lifeless. They looked at me not as a human being, but as a numbered parcel that needed to be delivered to the proper storage. Julian and Lydia stood on the front steps. Both wore their most respectable outfits, as if they were preparing to attend an important opening ceremony rather than sending their father to a place meant for people fading quietly toward the end of life. "Dad, take this coat with you. The car has air conditioning," Julian said gently, draping the sweater over my arm. His hand touched my shoulder with a light brush, lacking the trembling anxiety it had carried days earlier. Now his touch felt steady and triumphant. Lydia held a small bag containing my medicines and a few personal belongings. She smiled brightly, the kind of smile people usually reserve for a journalist's camera. "Don't worry, Dad. We'll visit every weekend. Golden Sunset has a beautiful rose garden. You won't miss Mom's roses." I did not reply. I quietly stepped into the vehicle, refusing the assistance of the medical staff. My knees ached, the fall the other day still sending dull tremors through my bones, yet I forced my back to remain straight. A structural engineer must never reveal a sinking foundation in front of outsiders. The rear door slammed shut. The locking mechanism clicked with a dry sound, like the closing of an iron cage. I sat on the plain cushioned seat and looked through the tinted window. The vehicle began moving, rolling slowly over the gravel driveway. Through the hazy glass, I saw Julian and Lydia standing close together. They waved goodbye, their motions rhythmic and steady like pendulums. They continued performing the role of devoted children until the very last second, until the vehicle reached the main gate. Then the moment the wheels touched the asphalt road outside, a scene unfolded that tightened my chest, even though I had long expected it. In the rearview mirror, I saw Julian spin around abruptly. The caring expression vanished in an instant, replaced by frantic urgency. He rushed behind the dense bushes beside the house and dragged out a large wooden sign that had clearly been prepared in advance. Lydia stood next to him. She was no longer waving, but pointing and urging him on, her face hardened with ambition. Julian lifted a hammer and drove it hard into the lush green lawn, the place where Eleanor had once spent hours carefully pulling out every weed. Thud, thud, thud. The sign rose up, brazen and towering in the garden. "House for sale. Owner contact." Below the words was the logo of the construction corporation I had heard Julian mention during those anonymous phone calls. They could not even wait a single hour for the vehicle to disappear from sight. They planted that sign into the heart of the house the way someone plants a victory flag on a fortress that has just fallen. I leaned my head against the cold wall of the ambulance seat. A single hot tear, rare for a dry, stubborn man like me, rolled down my wrinkled cheek. I did not cry because I was being expelled from the place where I belonged. I cried for Eleanor's rose garden, now being trampled under leather shoes and hammered stakes of betrayal. The vehicle accelerated, carrying me toward Golden Sunset. The name sounded romantic, yet in truth it was a place where the sun had already set, leaving permanent darkness for those who had been forgotten. "Are you all right, sir?" a nurse asked, her hand moving across a tablet as she checked my heartbeat. "I'm fine," I replied, my voice rough but steady. "I'm just calculating something." The nurse offered a polite smile before turning away again. I took a deep breath. This was not the end. This was a strategic repositioning. I came here to leave the battlefield behind so the house itself could carry out its sentence. When I stepped out of the vehicle, I did not look back. I knew that behind me, in the rose garden, a collapse of finance and character had already begun unfolding according to the very numbers Marcus and I had set in motion. Golden Sunset appeared exactly as shown in its glossy brochure. A neoclassical building, lawns trimmed so perfectly they seemed unreal, and hallways filled with the scent of lavender oil struggling to mask the odor of aging and decay. Yet to an engineer like me, this grand exterior felt like nothing more than a cheap, waterproof coating covering a structure already rotting inside. My room was on the third floor, a square and comfortable space with a window overlooking the back garden. But the moment I set my suitcase down, I felt the suffocation. The walls here could not speak. They held none of the soul of oak wood or the warmth of mint green paint. They were cold like unpaid invoices. During the first few days, I spent my time observing. This nursing home was a strange ecosystem of human ruins. In the common hall where elderly residents sat in velvet armchairs, I began noticing eyes that looked just like mine, eyes carrying calculations that had been betrayed. The first person I spoke with was Mr. Miller, a former construction contractor whose rough hands now trembled while holding an old newspaper. "You're new here?" Miller asked, his voice hoarse like rust grinding through metal. "Don't stare at that flower garden too long. The more you look, the more it feels like a funeral wreath for the house you just lost." Miller told me about his seaside villa, now turned into a luxury hotel by his son after tricking him into signing a financial support agreement. Then there was Mrs. Elena, who once owned a chain of fruit stores, sent here by her daughter right after transferring the property title to make business loans easier. Every person here was a chapter in a sorrowful book about betrayal through property. We were not residents enjoying retirement. We were debts already settled, obstacles removed to clear the path for money. Here, filial devotion is measured by monthly service fees. Miller laughed bitterly. If your children stop paying, you'll see the real face of this golden sunset. Even so, the instinct of a surveyor did not allow me to remain trapped in self-pity. I began noticing irregular patterns in the way this place operated. Every Wednesday afternoon, a man in a black suit carrying an expensive leather briefcase appeared at the executive director's office. He was not a doctor and not a relative of any resident. He was a legal broker. I noticed that after every visit, one or two elderly residents were suddenly transferred to the special care unit, where contact with the outside world became extremely limited. My suspicion ignited when I accidentally passed the nurse's room and overheard two staff members whispering, "The new patient in room 302, Mr. Arthur, did his son give instructions?" "Yes, Julian said to let him relax for a few days. If he tries to call his personal lawyer or wants to change anything about his will, report it immediately. Julian promised extra support fees for the center if we help the old man sign the remaining appendices." My blood boiled. Golden Sunset was not simply a voluntary prison. It was a link in the supply chain of greed. Julian did not only want to send me away, he had partnered with the people here to create a legal and psychological vice. They created an isolated environment where the elderly felt weak and confused, and when their spirits were most broken, they would present property transfer documents to help them manage their assets better. A filthy, hidden alliance. Julian had used my own money to bribe my jailers. That night I sat alone in the dark, staring out the window. The distant lights of the city shimmered like golden coins. I realized that if I did not act quickly, my conservation trust, strong as it was, might still be manipulated or pressured into cancellation under the weight of this confinement. I pulled out the small phone I had hidden inside the lining of my suitcase. I did not call Julian. I called Marcus. "Marcus, the plan needs to move faster," I whispered into the receiver. "They're working together. Golden Sunset is a dumping pit, and they want to bury me alive under these documents." "I understand, Arthur." Marcus's voice remained calm, yet powerful on the other end. Tomorrow morning, the construction corporation will officially receive a notice from the State Preservation Council. Julian will get the first phone call. Hold your ground. Remember, you are the surveyor. You know where the weakest point in the structure lies. Let them bring the roof down on their own heads. I put the phone away, my mind filled with a cold determination. Julian believed he had locked an old tiger inside a cage. He forgot that even an old tiger still knew every path within the forest it had built. They wanted me to sign appendices? Fine. I would show them an appendix where every number became a sentence and every clause tightened like a noose around the career of an ungrateful son. Golden Sunset was unusually restless this morning. The rapid footsteps of Julian echoed down the third-floor corridor, shattering the usual stillness where patients were dozing beside their cups of weak tea. He was no longer calm, no longer playing the role of the slow, devoted son. He burst into my room like a whirlwind, his face flushed with excitement, his eyes blazing with the manic light of someone who had just hit the jackpot. "Dad! Dad, look at this! God has blessed us!" Julian shouted, waving a thick envelope made of premium cardstock, embossed with a dark red wax seal that radiated authority. I slowly set down the technical book, removed my reading glasses, and looked at my son who was trembling with joy. "What could possibly make you turn this entire prison upside down, Julian?" He dropped to his knees beside my chair, panting. "An offer to buy the house, Dad. Not from that cheap shopping mall corporation. A mysterious tycoon, a collector of historic architecture from overseas. They sent the letter directly to me this morning through an international law office." Julian pulled out the photocopied check attached to the letter with shaking hands. $10 million, Dad. Double the market price. They said they are obsessed with your red oak mortise and tenon joinery and your natural ventilation system. They want to buy it to turn into a private museum, keeping everything exactly as it is. Do you see? Everything you built, someone has finally valued it correctly. I took the letter. The lines were typed with impeccable formality, the architectural terminology precise down to the smallest detail. The buyer identified themselves as a heritage investment fund based in Switzerland. They presented only one condition. The transaction had to be completed within the next 24 hours at the central notary office. Otherwise, the offer would be withdrawn because they had another option in the South. $10 million, I murmured, my fingers lightly brushing the wax seal. That number is enough for you to wipe out your debts, buy a villa in the suburbs, and live like a king, isn't it? That's right, Dad, and I'll get you out of this miserable place immediately. You'll have a private nurse at home, not living with senile old men like Miller anymore. Julian gripped my hand tightly, his voice choking with emotion, or perhaps with the greed squeezing his throat. I glanced out the window. Down in the courtyard, I saw Lydia's car, already running. She was leaning against the door, constantly tapping on her phone, her face restless as if she were sitting on hot coals. They did not know that, at the corner of the hallway, Mr. Miller was watching me through the crack of his door, his eyes carrying a silent warning. "You have to come with me right now," Julian urged. "The mobile notary car is waiting in the lobby. We just need to go to their office. You sign the absolute ownership transfer confirmation, and the money will be transferred directly into the escrow account under both our names." He pulled a neatly pressed set of new clothes from his bag. "Change, Dad. This is our ticket to a new life." I stood up, letting Julian help me put on my coat. He fumbled with each button, his mouth constantly mumbling about future plans, about how he would get rid of the creditors, about the luxuries Lydia would buy. He was completely blinded by the figure of $10 million. "Let's go," I said, my voice strangely calm. Julian escorted me to the car, as if I were the most precious crystal in the world. He closed the door for me, fastened my seatbelt, even adjusted the headrest. This care was warmer than the 7 days of pretense before I entered the facility. As the car rolled out of the Golden Sunset gate, I saw the nursing home's executive director standing on the balcony with a phone in hand, his face filled with resentment at the thought of losing a fat source of income. Julian sneered, rolled down the window, and raised his thumb in open challenge. "Goodbye to this hell," Julian shouted. The car sped toward the city center. Lydia sat in the passenger seat, constantly touching up her makeup, her lips brilliantly red. "Dad, you will be proud of us. We found the most worthy buyer for the work of your lifetime." "Are we almost there?" I asked quietly. "5 more minutes, Dad. The office is right in that glass tower ahead." Julian pointed excitedly. I looked at the glass tower glittering in the noon sunlight. It looked magnificent, yet also fragile. All it would take was one truth brought into the light, and the entire tower would shatter. "Good," I told myself. 40 years working as a surveyor, and this will be my final measurement. A measurement of a man's true worth. The glass tower in the city center glittered under the midday sun, reflecting the extravagance of an era that valued numbers more than tangible things. Julian and Lydia stepped out of the car with the posture of people who believed they had conquered the summit of the world. Julian wore a tailored, dark blue suit, his glossy silk tie tied with almost obsessive precision. Lydia looked dazzling in a fitted black dress, wearing the pearl jewelry that I knew she had probably just charged to a nearly maxed-out credit card so it would match the status of the daughter of a man about to receive $10 million. They escorted me through the grand lobby, the sharp clicks of Lydia's high heels striking the marble floor like the hammer of an auctioneer. "Stand up a little straighter, Dad," Lydia whispered in my ear as we stepped into the elevator. "Don't let them think the daughter of a brilliant engineer looks so miserable. It's almost over, Dad. In 10 minutes we'll walk out of here as millionaires." I remained silent and let them lead the way. My eyes were not on the floor numbers flashing on the electronic display, but on my own reflection in the mirror. A 70-year-old man wearing an old coat, standing between two guardians of greed. The #1 notary office was on the highest floor, where the entire city could be seen below. The atmosphere was solemnly quiet, carrying the faint scent of fresh paper and printer ink. At the large mahogany table in the center of the room sat a middle-aged man in a gray suit, waiting calmly. His face carried the seriousness of someone entrusted with the balance of law. Beside him sat a young woman, representing the mysterious buyer, the heritage investment fund Julian had dreamed about. "Good afternoon, Mr. Arthur. Good afternoon, Miss Lydia," the notary said in a calm, professional tone. "All documents have been prepared according to the request of the representing law office. As agreed, because of the exceptional value of the transaction and its urgency, we will proceed with the signing immediately." Lydia cleared her throat, trying to contain the excitement that made her hands tremble. "Yes, we are ready. My father is fully conscious and voluntarily carrying out this transaction to contribute to your Heritage Preservation Fund." Julian sat quietly beside her, watching with restless anticipation. Lydia opened a gold-plated fountain pen and slid it toward me with a radiant smile that felt unsettling. "Sign it, Dad. $10 million are waiting for us on the other side of that paper." The notary opened the thick stack of documents and pushed the main page toward me. Lydia and Julian leaned forward over the table, their eyes locked on the space reserved for my signature. They did not bother reading the smaller lines above it. The number $10 million had already erased every analytical instinct they had. "Wait," I said. My voice sounded clear in the silent room. "I would like the notary to read the main clause of this document out loud. An engineer always double-checks the final measurement before pouring the concrete." Lydia frowned slightly and glanced at her watch. "Dad, we've already reviewed the draft. There's no need to waste everyone's time." "Let him read," the notary interrupted calmly, giving me a subtle nod. "That is the legal right of the registered property owner." He cleared his throat and began reading in a steady voice. "According to the expressed will of Mr. Arthur, the sole owner of the property located at 40 Green Oak Street, Mr. Arthur hereby declares the cancellation of all previous authorization documents signed with Mr. Julian. At the same time, under the supervision of the Heritage Preservation Fund, Mr. Arthur executes the following action: donating full ownership of the house and the land to the Charity for the Support of Abandoned Elderly. All transfer value provided by the mysterious buyer, the Heritage Fund, will be placed directly into a permanent trust to support elderly individuals who have been abandoned by their children or deceived into surrendering their assets. The air in the room suddenly felt as if it had been drained away. The smile on Lydia's lips froze, then shattered like cheap glass. She jumped to her feet, eyes wide, her face turning pale as death. What is this? Donation? Charity? Lydia shouted, her voice breaking as shock rippled through her chest. What are you talking about, Dad? Where is the $10 million? That house was supposed to go to the construction corporation. You already signed the authorization papers giving me control. That authorization became void the moment I signed the preservation trust with lawyer Marcus 2 days ago, Lydia, I said calmly, picking up the fountain pen she had prepared. And that mysterious buyer? She is the legal representative of the very fund Marcus and I established. There is no $10 million waiting for you. There is only a notarized judgment of conscience. Lydia let out a shriek of fury and lunged for the documents, trying to tear them apart, but the notary quickly pulled them away. You can't do this. Lydia rushed toward the table and grabbed my collar, but 2 security guards at the door immediately stepped in and pulled her away. You've gone insane. Do you want to die in that miserable nursing home? I'm not insane. I stood up, feeling a strange calm spread through my spine, pushing away the ache in my joints. I'm simply carrying out one final accurate measurement. I gave you 7 days to show remorse, and you used them to oil the floor and prepare the excavator to erase your mother's memories. A structure flawed from its foundation, like you, does not deserve to inherit even a single mint green brick. The young representative of the Preservation Fund, who had been silent until now, stepped forward and opened another file. Ms. Lydia, she said coldly, evidence of your cooperation with the Golden Sunset Nursing Home to pressure elderly residents into signing property documents has been recorded and transferred to the Economic Crime Division of the police. The construction corporation to which you owe money has also just received notice that this land has officially been declared a protected heritage site that cannot be demolished. They have filed a lawsuit accusing you of fraud and misappropriation of the deposit funds. Julian slowly collapsed onto the polished wooden floor. All the glamour, the expensive suit, and the manufactured confidence evaporated. He was no longer the future millionaire he had imagined. He was simply a man drowning in debt and staring at the courtroom that awaited him. Lydia looked at him with utter disgust. She stepped backward toward the door, clutching her expensive handbag as if trying to salvage the last piece of wealth before the coming storm swept everything away. I picked up the pen and carefully signed my name on the charitable donation document. Each stroke carried the weight of 40 years of waiting, the love I had for Eleanor, and the judgment reserved for those who betrayed their own blood. When the final red seal was pressed onto the paper, I looked at Lydia. She was crying, not because she regretted what she had done to her father, but because she regretted not deceiving me more thoroughly. I will return to that house, I said quietly, loud enough for her to hear, but not as the owner. I will return as a technical advisor for the foundation. The mint green house will become a refuge for people like Mr. Miller and Mrs. Elena, elderly people pushed aside by children like you. We will live together among the memories you tried to sell. I turned and walked out of the office. Lydia and Julian remained behind, surrounded by worthless papers and the ashes of their $10 million dream. As the elevator doors closed, I saw myself smiling in the mirrored wall. I was no longer a silent observer in the shadows. I was an engineer who had finally repaired the greatest crack in his life. The car from the preservation fund was already waiting at the base of the tower. We would not return to Golden Sunset. We were going home. Back to the mint green kitchen, where beginning tomorrow, the laughter of forgotten elders would fill the empty spaces that greed had left behind. The final measurement had been completed. The margin of error, 0. The luxurious notary office, once a symbol of transparency, had now become an arena of exposed egos. Julian's shouting echoed through the room, bouncing off the soundproof glass walls before crashing back, sharp and desperate. "You're insane! You senile old fool!" Julian roared, his face burning red, the veins in his neck bulging like ropes ready to snap. He lunged toward the notary's desk, but 2 security guards had already locked his arms behind his back. "You can't recognize this contract. My father is mentally unstable. He no longer understands his own actions." Lydia, now stripped of all her elegance, collapsed onto the stone floor. Tears streamed down her face, smearing her expensive mascara. She cried out dramatically, her voice shrill and theatrical. "Dad, how could you treat us like this? You're sick, Dad." "You don't know what you're doing. Sir, please stop this," she pleaded with the notary. "My father was admitted to the nursing home because of memory loss. The fall down the stairs last week left him confused and unable to think clearly." They worked together perfectly, one aggressive, the other playing the grieving victim, trying to use the argument of mental incapacity to invalidate the charitable transfer I had just signed. It was the final move of people sinking into the mud, deny the other person's sanity in order to protect their own money. I stood there leaning against the mahogany chair, watching my daughter and my son-in-law perform the last act of their play. I felt no anger and offered no argument. An engineer never uses emotion to deal with a faulty structure. He uses data. "Calm down, Julian. Calm down, Lydia," I said quietly, yet the weight in my voice suddenly choked off their shouting. I slowly opened my worn leather briefcase and took out a large envelope bearing the seal of the Central University Medical Hospital. "Julian, you claim I became confused after the fall down the stairs? These are the MRI scans and the neurological evaluation conducted privately on the same afternoon the 2 of you went to visit Golden Sunset," I said, sliding the file toward the notary. The head of the psychiatric department confirmed that Arthur's cognitive clarity is far above the average for his age. There are no signs of Alzheimer's or any form of mental decline. I prepared this material in advance because I knew you would try to dig at the foundation when you failed to demolish the house itself. Julian's face shifted from red to pale. He stared at the medical report as if it were a death sentence. I was not finished. A precise measurement always requires verification from multiple sources. From the pocket of my coat, I took out the small silver recorder, the one I had hidden inside the air vent. I pressed the play button. The room fell silent. Only the faint hiss of the recording could be heard. Then Julian's voice emerged clearly, cold and ruthless. "All we need is the old man's signature on the authorization papers. Then we sell the place to the Shopping Mall Construction Corporation. My debts disappear. Just prepare the excavators. By the time the old man realizes the house is a pile of rubble, he'll already be locked away in that 5-star retirement resort. No one listens to the cries of a senile old man." Then Lydia's voice followed, dripping with sarcasm and contempt. "This house is so gloomy. I feel sick every time I smell that old oak wood. We need to get him out soon so we can sell it and buy an apartment downtown." The recording ended with Julian's triumphant laughter. Every word struck like a hammer against the mask of devotion they had worn so carefully during the past 7 days. The notary looked at them with undisguised disgust. The representative from the Preservation Fund quietly wrote notes in her notebook. Lydia stopped crying. She stared at the recorder as if it were a demon. Julian completely collapsed, his arms hanging loose, his entire body like a building whose columns had been removed, sinking into the armchair nearby. "You see," I said, placing the recorder back into my pocket, "in architecture, the most dangerous thing is the hidden crack that cannot be seen with the naked eye. I heard the fracture inside your hearts a long time ago, but I hoped my measurement was wrong. Unfortunately, numbers and data never lie." I walked over and stood before Lydia, looking down at my only daughter. "You were right about one thing. This house is too gloomy for an old man. It is not gloomy because of the mint green paint or the memories of your mother. It is gloomy because it carries the breath of the greed you brought into it. By giving it to the preservation fund, I am bringing real light back into that house." "Dad, are you going to leave me on the streets?" Lydia whispered miserably. "You have not lost everything, Lydia," I said, my old eyes looking straight through her shattered soul. "You still have the hands and the mind that I worked so hard to educate. You simply no longer have your mother's house to sell, and you no longer have a father you can deceive. Learn to build your life again with honest bricks instead of stealing the foundations of others." I nodded to the notary and the representative of the fund, then calmly walked toward the door. This time no one supported me. I walked on my own 2 feet, my back straight. Every step across the marble corridor felt like liberation. The lies had collapsed, leaving behind the vast open space of truth. When I reached the building lobby, I saw the Golden Sunset ambulance still parked in the distance, but I did not walk toward it. Marcus was already waiting in his old sedan at the rear entrance. "Is it over, Arthur?" Marcus asked as I sat in the passenger seat. "No, Marcus," I said with a smile, watching the city lights begin to glow outside. "The demolition of the faulty structure is finished. Now the restoration begins. Take me home. I have a mint green kitchen waiting for its fire to burn again." The car rolled away, leaving the cold glass tower behind. I knew that starting tomorrow, the house at 40 Green Oak Street would no longer be a $1 million property. It would become a fortress of compassion, where lonely elders and I would continue writing new chapters upon a foundation that would never again hold lies. The late afternoon sun cast a deep crimson glow over the glass towers of the city center, like wounds across the skin of the city that had never fully healed. In the lobby of the notary building, the glamour of the morning had vanished, replaced by a harsh and naked reality. Julian stood frozen between the marble columns, still clutching his empty briefcase, the very one he had believed, only an hour earlier, would hold a $10 million check. A gust of wind swept through the quiet lobby, carrying the cold breath of collapse. Julian trembled as he pulled out his phone. The hands that were used to signing lucrative contracts now fumbled as he dialed the number of the construction corporation's director. "Hello, sir. There's been a small misunderstanding regarding the preservation procedure. I'll resolve it immediately." "Resolve it?" The furious shout from the other end of the line cracked through the lobby so loudly that even passers-by turned to look. "You lied to us about the legal status of that property. The $500,000 deposit must be returned within 24 hours. If not, you will speak with the corporation's lawyers and with the men who handle my debts. Don't even think about running, Julian." Beep, beep, beep. The phone slipped from Julian's hand and shattered on the stone floor. He turned toward Lydia, hoping for comfort, for an embrace in the middle of disaster. What he received was colder than death. Lydia stood 5 steps away, clutching her Hermes handbag tightly. The artificial warmth in her pearl-like eyes had vanished, replaced by pure contempt. She was no longer crying. The theatrical tears she had shed in the notary office had dried, revealing a face calculated and chilling. "Look at you, Julian," Lydia said coldly, her voice sharp as a blade. "Pathetic." "What are you saying, Lydia?" Julian asked in disbelief. "I did all of this for us, for your future." "Stop vomiting those words," Lydia cut in, stepping back as Julian tried to move closer. "I won't let myself be dragged into your swamp of debt and prison." The divorce papers will be sent to you, though I suppose you no longer have an address to receive them. Let's just pretend we never knew each other." Before Julian could recover from his wife's betrayal, a heavy hand landed on his shoulder. "Mr. Julian, we are from the Economic Crime Division," a plainclothes officer said, showing his badge. "You are accused of colluding with the Golden Sunset Nursing Home to exploit the assets of elderly residents and a possible fraud involving the construction corporation's deposit. You need to come with us." At that same moment, from behind the building gate, 3 large men with tattooed arms began walking toward the lobby. They were not police officers. They were the collectors sent by creditors Julian had avoided for months. When they saw the police escorting Julian, they did not intervene yet, but their searching eyes seemed ready to tear him apart on the spot. In a moment of sheer terror, Julian ran. He shoved the officer aside and bolted into the crowded street. He ran like a madman, his expensive suit tearing at the shoulder as he collided with rushing pedestrians. Behind him, the sound of car horns, police shouts, and the pounding footsteps of debt collectors merged into a chaotic storm. The scene quickly turned into a bitter spectacle for the people on the street. Julian, the almost millionaire, was now sprinting through narrow alleys. He tripped over a pile of cardboard boxes and fell face first into a heap of trash by the roadside. His polished leather shoes were now covered in mud and filthy water. "Pay up, you bastard," the collectors roared right behind him. Julian scrambled to his feet, his face smeared with dirt, his silk tie twisted around his neck like a torn strip of cloth. He dashed through a food market, crashing into a fruit stand and sending oranges rolling everywhere. Vendors cursed, creditors chased him, and police whistles screamed through the air. He ran in circles around the same central district where only that morning he had sat in a luxury car dreaming about $10 million. Now he was nothing more than a sewer rat dragged into daylight, hunted by the very numbers he once worshipped. Finally, in a dead-end alley behind an administrative building, Julian collapsed from exhaustion. A moss-covered brick wall stood in front of him. Behind him came justice and debt, closing in together. He gasped for breath as tears mixed with sweat across his face. In that moment, he remembered his father-in-law's words. "A structure flawed from its foundation can never stand against the storm." Miles away, at the house on 40 Green Oak Street, the atmosphere carried an entirely different tone. The heavy iron gate opened slowly as Marcus's car arrived. I stepped out and took a deep breath of the scent of soil and roses. The shameless "for sale" sign had been removed and thrown into the trash. In its place, a polished bronze plaque had been mounted on the wooden pillar of the porch. "Preservation Residence, where memories live again." Mr. Miller and Mrs. Elena stepped out of the car behind me. They looked at the house with shining eyes filled with amazement and emotion. "Arthur, this is your home?" Mrs. Elena whispered, touching the mint green paint on the wall. "It's beautiful. It smells like life." "It's our home, Elena," I said with a smile, leading them inside. "Here there are no nurses watching us, no false contracts, only tea, oak wood, and the stories we still have time to tell." I walked into the kitchen and lit the old oven. The fire crackled softly, warm golden light spreading through every corner, pushing away the cold gloom Lydia had once brought into the house. On the mahogany table, I placed Eleanor's photograph. She was smiling, a smile that seemed to say, "You did the right thing, Arthur." That night, after my new friends had fallen asleep in rooms filled with the scent of cinnamon, I sat alone by the window. A message arrived from Marcus. "Julian has been detained. Lydia disappeared with another real estate broker. Justice followed the blueprint you designed, Arthur." I turned off the phone and looked out at the rose garden under the moonlight. My life had been a long series of measurements. I had measured the strength of concrete, the settlement of soil, and finally, I had measured the weight of greed. The price of greed is absolute loneliness in a world obsessed with numbers. The price of compassion is something else entirely. Returning home, breathing the scent of mint green paint again, and knowing that these walls will never again hear the sound of lies. This spring, Green Oak Street will be greener than ever. Because here, the foundation is no longer built with money, but reinforced with hearts that have found their way back to one another. The spring winds drifted through Oak Street, carrying the scent of renewal, yet also the faint chill of harsh truths. House number 40 had changed. Warm yellow light spilled from the windows, and the laughter of Mr. Miller and Mrs. Elena echoed from the living room, forming a quiet symphony of souls who had finally found a place to rest. I stood on the porch, holding a watering can for the rose bushes that had just begun to sprout new buds. That was when I noticed a lonely figure slowly walking from the end of the street. It was Lydia, but she was no longer the proud Lydia, dressed in a sleek black dress or adorned with gleaming pearl jewelry. She wore an old coat, her hair disheveled, her face hollow and worn after days of running and being abandoned by the new lover who left as soon as he realized she no longer had a single dollar to her name. Lydia stopped at the iron gate, her trembling hands gripping the polished brass bars I had recently restored. I set the watering can down and slowly stepped onto the porch. Her arrival did not surprise me. In architecture, when a structure collapses, the debris often falls back toward the very foundation it once despised. "Dad," Lydia whispered. Her voice was hoarse, filled with a desperate sorrow. She pushed open the gate and walked into the garden. The moment she stood before me on the oak steps, Lydia suddenly collapsed to her knees. Her knees struck the wooden floor, the same floor she once called gloomy and rotten. "Dad, I was wrong. I was truly wrong," she cried, real tears finally streaming down her face and soaking the front of her coat. "Julian has been arrested. I have nowhere left to go. Everything is gone, Dad. Please, please let me come home. I'll take care of you. I'll do anything. Just please don't abandon me like this." I looked down at the woman kneeling at my feet. The father in me felt a tight ache in his chest. This was the daughter Eleanor had once prepared the most beautiful wedding dress for, with all the love in her heart. But the engineer in me saw something else entirely, a crack that could never be repaired. I did not help her up. Instead, I turned back into the house and brought out a small, worn, brown leather suitcase, the one I had packed with my own hands the night before. I set it beside Lydia where she knelt. "These are the things you need," I said calmly. Lydia looked up, her eyes suddenly flashing with a pitiful spark of hope. "Dad, are you giving me money or the key to my old room?" Her trembling hands opened the suitcase, but the hopeful smile vanished instantly. Inside there was no money, no jewelry, and no keys. There was only an old cloth doll missing one eye, a few childish drawings scribbled in crayon, and a small hair clip Eleanor had bought for her during her first Christmas as a child. These were the last remaining memories of a time that had been poor but warm, a time when Lydia was still a girl who could smile at the simplest things. "Look carefully, Lydia," I said, pointing at the suitcase. "Those are the only things in this house that truly belong to you. They are not worth $10 million. They cannot be pawned or mortgaged. They are simply memories." Lydia picked up the cloth doll, her hands shaking violently. "Dad, are you sending your own daughter away when I have nothing left?" "I am not sending my daughter away," I said as I sat down on the top step, looking out at the quiet street. "If you had come here as a daughter returning home, this door might have opened. But you came here as someone who stood by while her husband tried to destroy the very foundation of this family. You watched as he plotted to take everything from your own father. You watched that for sale sign being planted in your mother's rose garden, and you were satisfied." I looked straight into Lydia's eyes, the eyes of a surveyor who never accepts moral error. "Listen carefully, Lydia. A father can forgive his daughter, because blood is instinct. But the builder in me cannot forgive someone who tried to tear down the foundation of this home. A house can be repainted, its roof replaced. But when the foundation is dug apart by the very people living inside it, the house is no longer safe to live in. "I will change, I swear," Lydia sobbed. "No, Lydia, you don't want to change. You simply want a place to hide from the storm of your debts," I replied as I stood up, my voice firmer now. "This house now belongs to the preservation shelter. It belongs to the elderly people who were abandoned by their own children, just as you once planned to abandon your father. If I let you stay, I would betray them, betray Eleanor, and betray the principles of a man who spent his life building things that must stand." I stepped back and placed my hand on the brass door handle. "Take the suitcase. It holds the most honest things you have ever had. Start again from there, somewhere else. Stop chasing $10 million. Start searching for the dignity you lost. That is the only asset that can help you survive in this world." Lydia looked at the suitcase, then at the door slowly closing before her. She understood that my silence was not cruelty, but the fairest judgment for everything she had done. "Dad," she called softly one last time. "Goodbye, Lydia," I said. The heavy oak door closed with a solid thud. It was the sound of something ending completely. I stood behind the door and closed my eyes. I heard Lydia's crying fade, then the slow dragging of footsteps across the gravel as she left the gate behind. From that moment on, I knew Oak Street would no longer carry the footsteps of betrayal. I returned to the living room, where Mr. Miller was preparing a pot of fragrant jasmine tea. He looked at me and nodded quietly, offering silent understanding. "You did the hardest job a craftsman can do, Arthur," Miller said. "You cut away the rotten wood to save the entire frame." I sat down beside my elderly friends and held the warm teacup in my hands. The rising steam blurred the lines on my face. The final measurement had truly ended. I had not only measured the human heart, but also the strength required to let go. The house still stood firm, mint green and peaceful, because now its foundation had finally been cleared of every lie. April sunlight poured like honey over the garden on Oak Street, filtering through the branches of the old oak trees, now sprouting fresh leaves, glimmering like scattered flakes of gold across the lawn. House number 40 was no longer a $1 million asset that tore people apart, nor was it the prison Julian once called it. Now, above the front gate, a finely carved mahogany sign bearing the name The Oak Heritage humbly welcomed its special visitors. The soft clang of the iron gate no longer carried the dryness of schemes and plots. Instead, it opened into a world where time seemed to slow down, making space for empathy and renewal. Inside the mint green kitchen, the spicy scent of ginger tea blended with the warm aroma of cinnamon spreading throughout the room. This was no longer the private territory of a lonely old man. Mrs. Elena, wearing her familiar floral apron, was quickly arranging fresh batches of hot ginger cookies onto a tray. The hands that once trembled with anxiety at Golden Sunset now moved with surprising agility when touching flour in the warmth of the oven. "Arthur, you forgot to drink your tea while it was still hot again," Elena called from the kitchen toward the living room, her voice full of life. I sat in the old armchair beside Mr. Miller. We no longer had to look at each other through cracks of suspicion. Miller was carefully using a small chisel to repair the leg of a wooden chair that termites had once damaged. He had been a contractor all his life, and holding tools again was the best medicine for feeling young. "You know, Arthur," Miller said while blowing away the wood dust, squinting with a smile, "this chair is a lot like us. It looked like it was finished, ready to be thrown away. But replace one supporting beam and polish it a little, and it can stand strong for another few decades." I took a sip of ginger tea, feeling the warm spice travel down my spine. "You're right, Miller. The structure of a human being can sometimes be even more resilient than red oak, so long as they find the right foundation to stand on. The Oak Heritage had officially become a small community center, a pilot model for the Preservation Foundation that Marcus and I had worked hard to establish. There were no expensive service fees and no complicated contracts demanding people's assets. The elderly residents here lived by a simple principle: sharing and preservation. Those skilled in carpentry repaired the house. Those who loved cooking prepared communal meals. And those with medical knowledge monitored everyone's blood pressure. Every Saturday afternoon, the house opened its doors to seniors in the neighborhood for small gatherings. Conversations about architecture, history, or simply listening together to classical music from Eleanor's old record player. The soft laughter filled spaces that once held nothing but the sound of my own sighs. I realized something remarkable. When I gave up personal ownership of the house, I gained something far greater in return. The house no longer belonged solely to Arthur. It belonged to everyone who valued time and compassion. This afternoon, Leo, my little grandson, came to visit with his mother, Julian's new wife after his quick divorce from Lydia. Julian was currently serving a sentence of community labor and rehabilitation, while Lydia had disappeared entirely. I lifted Leo into my arms and walked him around the house. "Grandpa, our house is so lively now," Leo shouted happily when he saw Mr. Miller carving a small wooden toy car for him. "Yes, Leo," I said, gently patting his head. "A real home isn't measured in square meters. It's measured by the number of laughs echoing inside it. You see, these mint green walls are no longer gloomy because they're reflecting everyone's joy." I showed Leo the scratches on the wooden floor, the very marks Lydia once wanted to erase. Now I had carefully polished them, like medals awarded by time. They reminded us that perfection does not lie in flawless surfaces, but in the ability to endure the impacts of life without collapsing. As the sun began to set, painting the rose bushes in the garden crimson, I stood alone on the wooden steps. A gentle breeze carried the scent of freedom. Marcus walked in through the gate carrying a folder of documents. "Good news, Arthur," Marcus said with a smile. "The city is considering expanding our Oak Heritage model. Other owners of historic homes are thinking about donating their properties to the foundation after seeing what you've done here." I looked at my house, my final fortress. It stood there, steady and peaceful, under the evening glow. I knew that even when I was no longer here, the oak beams, the mint green paint, and Eleanor's spirit would continue warming the hearts of those who needed shelter. The mission of a surveyor is not only to mark the boundaries between pieces of land, but also to recognize the boundary between greed and compassion. I spent 70 years learning how to build structures from concrete, yet it took only the final months of my life to learn how to build a home out of kindness. In the kitchen, Elena began playing the song Eleanor loved most. The gentle melody flowed through the house, blending with the wind and the laughter of old friends. I closed my eyes, a peaceful smile forming on my lips. The final measurement had been completed. The margin of error was truly zero. "Welcome home," I whispered softly, to myself, and perhaps to the spirit of the house that now seemed to breathe with new happiness. The sunlight of a late May afternoon filtered through the leaves, casting a gentle amber glow across the stone table in the rose garden. The air was so still that I could hear the quiet hum of a honeybee searching for nectar, and the soft footsteps of Elena arranging a tray of ginger tea on the porch. This was the moment a surveyor like me cherished most, when every movement in the world seemed to settle into perfect balance. In front of me were no longer dry, technical drawings filled with numbers like L, W, or H. Instead, there was an old leather notebook, its pages yellowed by time, but still carrying the scent of fresh ink. I was writing the final lines of my memoir, not to boast about the towering structures I had once built, but to record how I managed to save a home from the collapse of human character. I paused my pen and looked out into the garden. Only a few months ago, this place had been clouded by schemes and the breath of greed. But nature has a remarkable ability. It knows how to cleanse stains through time. At the base of the old stone wall, exactly where Lydia once hammered the first nail to plant the "For Sale" sign, I noticed something unexpected. Amid the fragments of betrayal, among the scattered stones left behind from that terrible argument, a small white rose shoot had quietly pushed its way through the soil. It was fragile, bright green and full of life. It had not grown from careful tending in an elegant flower pot. It had risen from the rubble itself, forcing its way through dry gravel toward the light. A new beginning. A silent forgiveness that nature seemed to grant this house. Looking at that tiny rose shoot, I understood that Eleanor had never truly left. She was still here, reminding me that after every collapse, if the foundation is strong enough, life will always find its way back. I bent down and wrote the concluding lines of the book of my life. My fingers trembled slightly, not because of age, but because of the emotion of an architect who had finally discovered the most perfect blueprint of all. For 40 years in my profession, I believed a house stood firm because of steel beams and solid concrete. I was wrong. Those things only keep a building from collapsing physically. A true home can only stand when it is held together by sincerity and compassion. Property can be purchased with money. Ownership can be transferred with lifeless legal documents. But a home truly belongs to you only when you know how to protect its soul. The soul of a house does not lie in its $1,000,000 market value. It lies in the smell of ginger tea in the morning, in the creak of the third wooden step when someone climbs the stairs, and in the way we treat each other when hardship arrives. Julian once held the keys. Lydia once had the legal rights as well. But neither of them ever truly possessed this house, because they had already lost their own souls long before stepping across its threshold. I closed the notebook. In the distance, Mr. Miller was gently helping Elena walk along the rose beds. They were talking about plans for the coming summer, about repainting the western fence. In many ways, they had become the true keepers of the oak heritage, not by law, but by love. A light breeze passed through the garden, carrying the sweet fragrance of roses in full bloom. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, feeling a deep peace settle into every corner of my body. My final measurement contained no margin of error. I had measured the distance between greed and peace, and I knew I was standing exactly where I belonged. Behind me, the mint green kitchen glowed warmly with light. It was the light of truth, of compassion, and of a new family reborn from the ashes of lies. I took a deep breath. The scent of damp soil, oak wood, and freedom blended together in the evening air. That little white rose shoot would grow taller, spreading its fragrance and covering the scars of the past. The house on Oak Street would continue telling its story to generations yet to come. The story of a surveyor who finally learned how to strengthen walls, not with steel, but with the human heart. Dusk slowly painted the horizon purple. I smiled, a truly satisfied smile. The blueprint of my life was complete, and it was more beautiful than any structure I had ever built. The final measurement of my life had ended with zero error. Julian was now serving his sentence, and Lydia had lost everything. Some people say I was too harsh with my own child, but as an engineer, I understand one truth clearly. When the foundation has rotted with greed, the only way to save the house is to remove the damaged part and rebuild it on truth. Now, Oak Street has finally found its peace. What do you think? Was I too cold-hearted with my own daughter? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if you value the true meaning of family, don't forget to like and share this story. Subscribe to the channel as well, and join me as we uncover more blueprints of life filled with hidden truths and intense battles of wit in the stories ahead.